Real quick, before we get started, if you'd like to support this ministry, you can do so by giving a donation of any amount at rightresponseministries.com/donate. Again, that's rightresponseministries.com/donate. If you're not able to support us financially at this time, you can still support this ministry in a great regard simply by subscribing to our YouTube channel, clicking the bell to be notified by new content, and of course, sharing our content with all your friends and family. Without further ado, let's get started. Hi, this is Pastor Joel Webben with Right Response Ministries, and you're listening to our show called Questions. Now, we're doing something a little bit different. As you know, today is Christmas Day, so first and foremost, Merry Christmas to you and yours. Now, what we're doing for today and next week, next Saturday, which will be New Year's Day, is doing a rerun of our two favorite all-time episodes of Questions. Today's episode is called What Makes Seeker-Sensitive Churches So Unbiblical? Again, that's what makes seeker-sensitive churches so unbiblical. This one episode has received about 10,000 views. It's one of our favorites. You're in for a real treat. What makes seeker-sensitive churches so unbiblical? What makes seeker-sensitive churches so unbiblical? In order to answer the question, I'm going to use a specific text from 1 John chapter 1. This is 1 John. We could look at all this chapter, and we could look at multiple other texts throughout the scripture as well, but we're going to focus our attention on just one verse. 1 John chapter 1, verse 5. It says this, "This is the message we have heard from him." This is John speaking as representative of the collective apostles. We being the collective apostles. He's speaking for the apostles. "This is the message that we have heard from him being Christ, and we now proclaim to you," that is the church that John is writing to, "that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all." I've written this. We live in an age when the good news of God's grace has been stripped of its power. The good news loses its meaning when the bad news is never properly conveyed. If someone discovered, for instance, the secret for curing all forms of cancer, this announcement would certainly be received as good news by all. But which individuals among us would celebrate the most? Would it not be those who were previously diagnosed with cancer? If a person discovers that Christ has died for their sin without first being made profoundly aware that they are actually a sinner and that the wages of sin is justly death, then they will never fully appreciate the beauty of what God has done for them in the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we have to have the proper starting place. Now, verse 5, 1 John chapter 1, verse 5 begins by saying, "This is the message we have heard from him and proclaimed to you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all." It is important to notice two things in this verse. Number one, John is not simply voicing his own personal speculations, his own personal opinion about what God might be like. Instead, what John says is this: "This is the message we have heard from Jesus, and we proclaim without altering, without taking creative license, without editorial power, we proclaim this same message which we received from Jesus now to you." The fact that God is light is an authoritative pronouncement. It's a declaration from Jesus himself through the apostles. So that's the first thing. The first thing that we notice from 1 John chapter 1, verse 5 is that John is not voicing his own opinion in regards to what God is like. This is what God says about himself. And what does God say about himself? He could say anything. And yet God is declaring himself through his son Jesus, through the apostles, to his church as light. So the second thing we know is this: John does not begin with his readers. He doesn't begin by saying, "This is the message we've received from Christ, that you are light, or you are this, or you are that." No, God. So the message that John receives from Jesus, he and the apostles, that he is now proclaiming to his hearers, first and foremost begins not with his hearers themselves, but with God. It is first and foremost a declaration not about his hearers and their identity and who they are, but who God is. John begins with God, and he brings his readers face to face, not first and foremost with God's love, but with God's holiness. See, John clearly states that God is light. Then, to ensure that his readers do not miss the point, he restates it in the negative by saying, and in him, in God, there is no darkness, that referring to no moral imperfections at all. God is holy. So, 1 John chapter 1, verse 5, what do we see? We see first and foremost, it is the job of the heralder of the message of Christ, apostle, or in our case today, pastors, to proclaim the message that we receive from Jesus. Not our own creative messages, not our own gimmicks, not our own strategies, not our own opinions, not our own dreams, not our own ideas, but to proclaim to our hearers the message which we received from Christ. And what is that message? First and foremost, it is a message that does not begin with making claims or meeting felt needs about our hearers themselves. It's a message that begins with a declaration about God. Not about you, but about God. Not about who you are, but who God is. And the first thing that John mentions about God is not his kindness, although he is exceedingly kind. It's not his love or his mercy or his grace, although he is loving and merciful and gracious. No, it's that God is light, not God is love. See, what's interesting is that this same letter, 1 John, is the letter, the particular book of the Bible that says God is love. But it says God is love later. What it says in the beginning, in the very first chapter, verse 5, is not God is love. See, John doesn't start with God is love. John starts with God is light. Not that God is love, but that God is holy, holy, holy. See, here's the danger in skipping ahead, in skipping the bad news and getting right to the good news. Almost the entire church growth movement in America blatantly contradicts the necessity of true Christianity beginning with the holiness of God. Not only does the American church object to the holiness of God, they actually have the audacity to object to Christianity beginning with God at all. They actually have, many pastors in this nation argue that historical Christian doctrine has been wrong. They think it's wrong to insist that the church's theology should be God-centered rather than man-centered. Now, some church growth leaders have even gone so far as to coin the term religious consumer. Have you ever heard that? Religious consumer. They've gone to great lengths to conduct massive surveys in which they ask unbelieving people what they would like to see in churches. Right? That's a bad idea. Asking unregenerate, unbelieving people who, according to Romans 8, not only are uninterested or indifferent to the things of God, but are hostile towards God. The mind of the sinful man is hostile towards God's law. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it. And yet, these church growth experts and seeker-sensitive pastors actually go to the religious consumer, primarily made up of unregenerate people, unbelievers, to ask them what they would like to see in churches. Asking the pagan, hey, what do you think church should be like? What would get you to come back and try church again? Now, thousands of people have responded to these surveys over the years by saying that they want a church that is more positive and happy. That's one of the biggest ones. Make church positive, happy clappy. They also don't want the pastor to focus on sin or a holy God who threatens sinners with his wrath. They want practical advice, less preaching and more advice on how to have healthier marriages and become better parents. They want 7 easy steps on how to be successful in reaching their full potential and their full purpose. They're all about, what's my purpose? Purpose-driven life. They also have asked for shorter sermons. Go figure. In fact, they've even demanded that pastors not preach at them at all, but rather that they should simply share with them. They've requested significantly less time explaining doctrine and using theological terms. These people require church services to be simpler, to be shorter, to be more positive, and most of all, man-centered, focused on them. Church marketers then go back to the drawing board with their research and redesign the church to meet the felt needs of these religious consumers. What's the result? What's the danger of skipping ahead? What's the danger of being seeker sensitive? Hundreds of thousands of people in America have started attending churches on Sunday. And hundreds of thousands of people in America have been pre-programmed by these churches to despise the true gospel if they were ever actually to hear it. So in conclusion, the church growth movement tells us to begin with man. But the Apostle Paul in 1 John chapter 1, verse 5, tells us to begin with God. The church growth movement tells us that when we finally get to God, we should start by saying, God is love. But the Apostle John tells us to begin by saying, God is light. God is holy. We must come to recognize that if we do not begin with God and His holiness, the love of God will not truly capture the hearts of the people that we are attempting to reach. A proper understanding of the holiness of God, and by proxy, a proper understanding of the sinfulness of man, is absolutely necessary in order for a person to really appreciate the beauty of the good news of the gospel. If we give into the temptation to immediately skip ahead to the good news without first taking the necessary time to set the stage with the bad news that God is holy and we are sinners who have rebelled against Him, then the gospel will inevitably fall upon deaf ears. So that is why seeker-sensitive churches are so unbiblical. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you would consider supporting Right Response Ministries, we'd be incredibly grateful. You can do so by going to rightresponseministries.com/donate to give your gift of any amount. If you're not able to support us financially, that's okay. You can still support us in a great regard simply by subscribing to our YouTube channel, clicking the bell, and of course sharing our content with all your friends and family. We can't do this without you, your support, and your prayers. So thank you.